All right, bringing all the good vibes, the not so good vibes, everything in between. It is Club and Country Qatar 2022. I am Andrew Wiebe, still with my partners in soccer, David Goss, Charlie Davies. The final international window is gone before the World Cup, guys. The U.S., disappointing. No goals, just 2 shots on goal. Losers to Japan, scoreless draw against Saudi Arabia. Things are much better for Canada, and we will talk to Joshua Kloke about that. He just wrote an awesome book about the Canadian national team, the history, the past, the current, the present, and maybe the future as well. Go check that out. He'll be with us to break down that side of things in just a little bit, but we're here to take the temperature, boys. Charlie, how you feeling? How you doing? It's been 24 hours since the final whistle on Saudi Arabia. Everyone has gone through a process here. There's been some mourning, there's been some anger, there's been lots of frustration, gnashing of teeth. I mean, if you look really, really hard, depending on who you talk to and where you look, you can find maybe some hope. We'll see if we can find some in this show. We're going to go through I know, I agreed, Dave. I haven't found any hope either. I just said that just so we'd have a little
Unless you're talking to Matt
positivity.
Turner's parents, I don't know that you found a lot of hope out of this camp.
Oh, sigh. Okay, so, where are you, Charlie, emotionally right now?
I've already vented, so
we don't get any venting. We don't get any. We don't get the fire.
I've already
You've let it go.
I've let it go. I've moved on because you have to think about the future and what is in front of us as big as the World Cup is. We have some serious things we have to address, issues within this team, and one is defensive foundation and the structure in which we play out of pressure. How do we make our better players better? How do we set them up to succeed and support for the number 9 position? So if the 9 is not going to be involved in the buildup, then your 9 has to be in the box. Your 9 has to stretch opponents, and your 9 has to finish, and you need goal scorers. So for me, it's about getting Christian Pulisic isolated more on the touchline and preventing him from coming inside our outside wingers.
Too much nitty gritty, Charlie.
Come on,
emotionally,
we need players to have possession in the attacking half and go and be creative and not be so predictable. So there are a number of things to look at. I'm positive that they'll start to put things together so that this will be a World Cup that we're going to look back at and say, man, there was some doubt, there were some ups and downs, but this team came together when it mattered most, and they got out of the group.
I would say I've talked about this for 3+ years. I still feel this. I think this week was a stark example of it. It's the youngest team in the world. There aren't veterans for them to lean on, and there are veterans in the team in Walker Zimmerman and Aaron Long and Matt Turner and whatever. Not international veterans, not World Cup veterans, not USMNT veterans. When you talk about young players, you ask about professionalism, and you do it not in a way of like, do they show up? Do they understand their job? But it's, do you bring intensity to everything you do? And yeah, playing 2 friendlies at empty stadiums in Europe with no one there, that's not fun. That's not exciting. And the U.S. played like it didn't matter. And they played like it didn't matter in their final games before the World Cup roster is set. And so the conversation coming out of the Japan game set by Greg Berhalter was about personality, which is its own issue and its own question mark. And I think it's one that may not be solved at the 2022 World Cup because, again, this team relies on players who don't have to do that for their clubs and are not at the stage where you reach that Xenex where your talent, your experience, and your knowledge all hit at their peak. So that's one issue, but just to not even play at that level, to not compete, to not win 50-50s, to not recognize what Japan's doing, and then come against Saudi Arabia, a team that is the worst team talent-wise at the World Cup and was missing 4 to 5 starters, and to not be able to impose yourself at any point and then lose as the game goes along, your chokehold on the game, that's what's disappointing, and that's where I look at this camp and this team and say, this is not what I expected, and the World Cup has become a complete unknown of what we're going to get.
I think the intensity of a empty stadium, because if you play in a Champions League final in an empty stadium or a semifinal in an empty stadium, does that mean it's not as, you're not going to be as excited? So I don't agree with the empty stadium take, but I will say that you're playing for the opportunity to bring your group together, to get on the right foot, to be on the same page and have an understanding of how we're going to move forward for World Cup. That's exciting. Whether it's on a training pitch with nobody there and you're playing against Brazil, or you're in an empty stadium in Europe playing against Japan and Saudi Arabia, you score goals. You're playing for your country ahead of a World Cup that's right around the corner. The excitement is there. It's the execution that failed. It doesn't look like they're having fun. It doesn't look like they're enjoying themselves. That's where I have an issue. Is there's not one player that smiled. There's not one player that was like, man, I'm happy. You can see that he's happy to be there. And then if there's no goals, how does the team get on? We had two shots on target in 2 matches. That against Japan and Saudi Arabia, no disrespect to them. That's not Brazil. That's not France. That's not England. You're not playing against the top teams that you would face in a World Cup if you were able to get out of your group and then move on. So for me, that's the big problem.
To me, it's not necessarily the lack of intensity. It's the personality side I get, and I think we understand maybe where that comes from, and it comes from what you're talking about, Charlie. But I also think it just comes from being sure about what you're doing as an individual and as a team. I thought they just looked confused. They looked confused with what to do about Japan's pressure. They look confused as to how to move the ball and get guys in positions to actually be that sort of game breaker that you're talking about, Charlie. They look confused when they got into the final third in crossing positions, whether it be timing of runs, the actual ball they wanted to play themselves, the decision-making process that they were having. They just looked confused. They did not look like they had a coherent idea about who they were and how they wanted to play in either of these games. They didn't look like they had a good idea about how to solve problems on the field, let alone a good idea of what was going to be coming at them. I mean, like the Japan game, like that's not, it wasn't, they either figure it out on the field or have that plan in place beforehand so that people know, okay, here's the press that's happening, here's how they're triggering it, here's what we do. And Greg Berhalter said afterwards, hey, we should have done better with that. We knew what the solution was, but we couldn't execute it. That's where it gets frustrating for me, is that we don't have any more as the U.S. games to warm up, to practice, to be together in a competitive setting out of this World Cup. There are no more. That was it. And you fell flat, not just from an execution standpoint, not just from a personality standpoint. You can debate about the intensity standpoint, but just there was no sort of like unified idea of what the hell we were doing. And maybe it was there and they just didn't execute it at all. But it doesn't really matter if it was there or not. If you don't execute it, it doesn't matter what the plan was, right? Like
and that's back-to-back games. It's not, it's one to have an idea. This is how we're gonna play. We haven't been together in a while. We're playing against Japan. They're super organized. You know exactly what they bring to the table, and you absolutely fall flat on your face. So you say, okay, everyone, we got spanked. We got dominated. It got a little better in the second half, but it's nowhere near good enough. The baseline for quality has to be here in a World Cup, not here. And we were here for a friendly, so low. So you expect against Saudi Arabia, who's weaker than Japan, to come out and have that statement game and say, okay, we left that Japan match in the past. We've moved on, and now you're going to see what we're about. Now we're going to play with that intensity. We're going to foul. We're going to out-foul. We're going to be physical, but we're also going to be nice and crisp and clean in the attacking third. There's going to be diagonals, long diagonals, short combinations into the box, playing into the channel, just showing different qualities that the U.S. have when the players are playing at their best. And we didn't do any of it. So that's what I think, frankly, pisses me off the most and pisses most fans off the most is you want to see progress. I know we can't always be at 10s. This is a game at camp where the first game we're at 3s and 4s and 5s. Maybe Matt Turner was at a 7. The next game, more or less the same, 5, 6s. You would expect a bounce back game, and we didn't get that. So now we have to sit here until November and hope that, off the grid, off the scene, that, Greg Berhalter's communicating with his players, that everyone's fit, that everyone's healthy, and then in that 1 week they have together before the first game, that they have ironed out all of the deficiencies that this team has. That's what we're hoping for.
Here's your silver lining from the camp. Wales is hoping for the same thing. England's hoping for the same thing. Iran actually had a good window. So that's your one positive is Wales also has to figure themselves out in that week. And so you're probably going to have two flawed teams going against each other to open up the World Cup.
I would say one, because yes, England, as bad as they've been in form, if you've seen their roster, they have a good chance to figure out. Maybe it's a couple of tactical adjustments, taking out a player here or there, and then adding another world-class player here or there. So
World-class players in Wales?
England.
England. Sorry.
Well,
I thought we were talking about Wales.
Either way, the nice thing is
Wales,
that we know
sure.
the English can rely on Gareth Southgate to do things that they would agree with, and they always perform at World Cups. So that's a good a double back-to-back for them. Let's dive into this a little bit more. Greg Berhalter says, if we're going to evaluate everybody, what I'd say in general, there's not many players that performed up to their normal levels in this camp. That smacks you in the face like a frying pan for sure, and I'm sure he's got a little bit of a reflection process to do himself on both the performance of the players and also his role in that. Christian Pulisic, quote, I'm not panicked at all. Weston McKennie, we know we can do better, and we know we'll have to do better. This window is a learning lesson to get the last little jitters out, and hopefully whenever we get to the World Cup, it will be how it used to be. Now, there's also a tweet going around about the last 7 matches against teams that are going to this World Cup for the U.S. The U.S. were shut out in 6 of them. The other one was a 3-0 win against Morocco. 0-0 was Uruguay. Let's talk tactics, because maybe I was confused. Maybe I missed this. I literally sat down with Greg, and I thought this is what I heard. Maybe I heard wrong. I thought I understood that this team had sort of made a transition from early days of the Berhalter era, we're going to play with the ball, we're going to build the game from the back, to, hey, we're at our best when we're more aggressive, when we're more direct, when we press the other team, when we're physical, when we impose ourselves on them, more off the ball sometimes, and then direct on the ball, and then win the set-piece battle. We hired a set-piece coach. This seems to be the way forward. Was I wrong? Did I make a logical jump there that was wrong? Because it seems like in this camp, whether it was Japan just saying, hey, we're going to force it into your center backs, or Saudi Arabia and that game and the way it was played, we didn't have that same sort of stance. And I understand if Japan's going to give you the ball, you've got to find a way to be a little bit more direct, which they were better at in the second half, and put them in the positions that you want to be that aggressive team. But am I missing something with the identity of this team? And how is it that we're still talking about that identity now ahead of the World Cup?
Well, what I will add is we're married to a system that doesn't work at the moment, and we've talked about Canada and John Herdman, and what has stood out to me is the flexibility in changing systems to get the best out of that group to make sure they're get the best result against that specific team, and so. Whether they had Alphonso Davies or not, and that's another part of this, they're not relying on one player to make the system. And if Alphonso Davies wasn't there, then they make the necessary changes so that they can get the best out of their group, out of their specific players. We've always stuck with the same system. Right now, whoever's playing the 9, it could be Jordan Pefok, it could be Josh Sargent, Ricardo Pepi, Jesus Ferreira. They're not getting service. And we don't have a 9 who, if they're not getting service regularly, that they can make the game on their own. They have that game-changing pace and speed and can take players 1v1. That's not at all any of their strengths. Not one single striker that we have in this pool can take the game and make a run, get the ball, dribble one guy, 2 guys, create a chance for themselves, and score a goal and rely on that player. None of them. They all rely on service and support. We're not giving that to them. So in my mind, this system has to change, because the only way that they would succeed is if the lines were so high and the press is so aggressive that when you make those turnovers, you're so close to goal that it doesn't matter, that it's one pass and boom, they got a shot on goal. If you are forced to drop deep or play in that mid block, when you do win the ball, none of our guys really make runs in the channels. I mean, Jesus Ferreira has developed that with FC Dallas this year. He's gotten better. Ricardo Pepi has shown flashes that he can do it, but we're not even looking to play those balls in the channel anymore. So for me, I think maybe you got to look at maybe considering changing the system. I know it's late, but it's possible to change the system to make it super simple, simplify the tactics, have a formation that would give this team a little bit more advantage in the attacking half.
Who is this team, Dave? And who are
Well-
they going to be in Qatar? Is it as simple as it's exactly who Greg has said he wants to build?
No, I think there's a few things, and I understand everything Charlie said, and in your question from it, I think you're talking about system, but you're talking about principles, and then you're talking about Greg Berhalter, right? And you hired a coach who has a way he sees the game played, and that's the way he wants it to be played. That's the way he sees it successfully. It doesn't fit the talent pool, and it hasn't, and I think he's bent and adjusted to try and make it successful throughout qualifying. He's never going to be Jurgen Klopp, right? Like, that's just not how he's ever going to see the sport. And so he's never going to put his players in a position 100% to do that. And I think he's trying, and that's where you talk about the conversation you had with him. And I think he uses the word intensity a lot when he means what other coaches would use other terms with, whether they're saying pressing or 50-50s or high press, whatever it is. He uses the term intensity, I think, to try and cover that. And talk about those facets of the game, but that's always going to be the reality. And I'd argue there are very few players in this team, as Charlie mentioned, that are at their best or are not at their best when they're not high pressing and, you know, using their athleticism and their tactical awareness and their aggression to change the pace of the game. So if you don't play that way, I think there are few players who are put into their best situation to win. Whether you're talking Tyler Adams or Brendan Aronson or Gio Reyna or Ferrer, any of these guys, you're talking about all players that are at their best when they're doing that. So there's always going to be this weird in between. And I go back to what I said before. It's a young team. It's all players who are not stars that carry their team in their club side. And you're asking them to come together and do that now as a national team. So where you say, oh, it's uneven, it's up and down, it's back and forth, where you ask me, who are they? What am I going to see tomorrow? I think all of that goes into that, which is individually they're all finding that as people, as players, and so as a team, they're going to look the same again. I would say, though, that they have risen to challenges, and they've risen to challenges when people have been in their face. Weston McKennie never plays better than when 90,000 people are yelling at him. And I think a lot of the players on this team have been that way as well, and that's where a piece of comfort still exists for me going into the World Cup, which is when they get onto that field and the lights are at their brightest and the world is watching and Gareth Bale steps out across from them, I think these players feel more comfortable because it's their chance to go hunt and attack and be that underdog or be questioned. And that's where they've been at their best against Mexico in Gold Cup finals, in Nations League final, and everything else we've seen over the last few years.
I think the word hunt and attack, those are words that that's where the identity comes in. And that's where I thought we had sort of turned that page. Okay, where does this team look its best? And I thought Christian Pulisic had an interesting quote after this game. Let's take a listen right now.
I think we have quality on the ball, but I think there's times where we can, use our strengths a bit more and be sort of a nasty team to play against and just a difficult team to play against. I think we saw glimpses of that tonight. In the midfield, we really want to dominate that battle for sure. And like I said, we're just going to continue to try to play more attacking and find ways to score goals.
Oh, nasty! We've never heard that before from the USMNT. It sort of sounds like. It sort of sounds like Christian is saying, hey, there's a way that we think we can be best here. And it's not always matching up with how we're looking at times. How do you bring that nastiness, Charlie? You mentioned a system change. That seems drastic. It seems like a lot. I'm more advocating to go back to sort of the attitude and the approach that they had in those big games you mentioned, Dave, against Mexico and others, where it was like, hey, we're going to beat you up off the ball. We're going to be ready to go direct to goal when we get that opportunity. We're going to put our best attacking players in good positions. Ferreira will drop in at times, and our wingers will run off of him. Ferreira can also get in behind in the channel if we need. And then on set pieces, Weston and Walker Zimmerman and others are going to beat you up.
What I was suggesting is not so much we're going to a 3-5-2, but maybe it's a 4-2-3-1 in terms of having two defensive midfielders, because Tyler Adams, as great as he is and covers so much ground, he can get pulled out. And I still feel like we need someone to solidify the middle third of the pitch in front of the center backs, because our center backs are now being forced to make the game. And I'd rather have Weston and Tyler as your 2 6s who get on the ball and try and play forward than whether it's Zimmerman or Long or Chris Richards or Mark McKenzie or Cameron Carter-Vickers, whoever that may be, I don't want our center backs to have to try and make the game because, one, they don't look comfortable doing it, and two, under pressure, it just doesn't look like they can break top teams down and start the attack in those type of environments. So for me, it's about tweaking things, not so much upheaval and we're going to throw out everything and go to a 4-4-2 diamond. But what I am saying is there's got to be tweaks and we need more width because you can't just rely on outside backs for your width every time. I think if Christian Pulisic was playing more towards the touchline, I know Anthony Robinson gets up and down when he's healthy, but I think there's going to be more space if you don't rely on him to try and make the game all the time. Try and keep him isolated, keep him out wide. I think he'll find more success. He'll find more space, and he'll be better suited to play 1v1 in those areas than inside where he's surrounded by 2 or 3, 4 players.
You guys want to go to the 26?
Yeah,
Let's
I would just add, and I know his name's obviously we have him down there in pen, but this is where Timothy Weah was a big miss. And it's not just a big miss. He needs to be healthy. He needs to be playing because he brings an element that no one else does. And he was one of the most important players in qualifying. And he's different than Aronson and Pulisic and Reyna. So I think you saw the difference in this team, especially against Japan, having that outlet and not having that outlet without him.
All right, he will be in our wingers. We've broken down the roster into 5 different categories here. They're pretty obvious: goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, wingers, forwards. We've got locks. We've got last 2 spots up for grabs, and I guess we'll try to figure that out as we go. Let's start with our first line here in the goalkeepers: Turner, Steffen, and then it's 2-1 vote. Charlie and I for Horvath. Dave thinks it's going to be Sean John. This is us trying to predict Greg Berhalter, not who we would bring, because who we would bring is frankly moot. It doesn't matter. Like, we could argue, yell about that all day, but that won't impact who actually goes to Qatar. There's our 3. Dave, make your case for Sean John, and then we'll quickly talk Matt Turner at number 1, which it seems like he's won that job, but I really won't believe that until Turner is on the lineup sheet against Wales.
I don't think Sean John's been off a roster since he got on, right? Other guys have been left off. Zach Steffen this time, Horvath has in the past, Sean John hasn't. So he's a leader in the group. He also has accepted the third goalkeeper role, but also has pushed to be the starter. And so I think you're in 2 hands right now, which is if Matt Turner's locked in, well, you know Sean Johnson's going to be a part of this group positively. And if he's not, you have confidence that Sean Johnson can step in and play well because he did so against Uruguay in the summer, and he probably will have a couple games to do it for NYCFC going down the stretch here because they've looked better and they could go deeper in the playoffs. So I just think, like with all these, you're on until you're off, and Sean Johnson's been on the entire time.
I think it's fair. Turner number 1, Charlie. Is it written in stone, or am I right to still be skeptical that Zach Steffen couldn't work his way back in there?
You're right. I don't think it is absolutely set in stone. I don't. In my mind, it is. But I think if Zach Steffen can stay healthy and play, and not only play, but play well the whole month of October into camp, I would not be shocked if he's put it on paper in the team sheet as the number 1 keeper for that first game against Wales. But in my mind, I think Matt Turner did enough in this camp to solidify himself as the number 1.
I agree. We'll see. Let's go to the defenders. Center backs: Richards, Long, Zimmerman, McKenzie, Carter, Vickers. Those are the guys that we have in right now. I think McKenzie and Carter Vickers are obviously the ones sort of on there's a balancing act there. We'll talk more about Eric Palmer Brown and others down the way here. Outside backs: Jedi, Dest, Yedlin. Those are the only 3 we have currently in as locks. Aaron Long or Chris Richards? Charlie.
Chris Richards. I think in this camp, Aaron Long showed he's not ready. He didn't have the confidence with the ball at his feet. There were too many giveaways against Japan, but it carried over to Saudi Arabia. So it wasn't, I got the jitters out and now I'm ready. It carried over, and it's, being late to challenges, getting on the ball and being nervous. And in this system, you're not supposed to be nervous, supposed to be confident. And I just think, given that Greg Berhalter said, I'm going to give you another go against Saudi Arabia, and it didn't go well, I think he's a great kid. I think he gives the team some grit. But as far as being a starting center back in a World Cup for the U.S. men's national team, he's just not there. And so Chris Richards, I think him and Yunus Musa not being in camp and Timo Weah probably had the showed just how important they were, and how much they were missed in this camp. So Chris Richards playing under Patrick Vieira, I know he's not playing every game, but that's a coach that empowers players on the team, and he's played minutes. He's gotten minutes in the English Premier League. This is a kid who's ready to go. He's got to be on the team sheet the first game against Wales.
Yeah, I think to the Sean Johnson question of when you asked me, and I said, once you're in, there has to be a reason you come out. Aaron Long played himself out this week, while Chris Richards couldn't play. And you also go back to, and I understand, turn of phrase conversation. Greg Berhalter saying he was missing 5 starters, brought up Chris Richards. Now, I think that's just a could have been 5 starters. I don't think he was giving his starting 11 for Wales, but it shows you at least where he stands in his mind. And I think it was a little unfortunate that Aaron Long didn't play his soccer this week. And as Charlie said, we got no time left. You can only give so many opportunities. If he's going to play like that when he's in this system, whether it's because he's listening to outside noises, whether he's nervous, whether he doesn't feel comfortable, whether he can't play at the level, which I don't believe is true, but whatever it is, if it still exists coming out of the Saudi Arabia game, there's no way he can prove it's gone away when you go into Belgium. And therefore, I think Chris Richards, if healthy, is in the driver's seat there.
How much did we play a high line over the course of this window?
Well, Japan didn't allow them to, and they never really adjusted to that. So they didn't pretty much at all in that game. And then in Saudi Arabia.
If you give the ball away and you can't get into the attacking half, you can't play a high line.
Yeah,
so
I agree, but at some point, don't you have to manipulate the game a little bit and change your build out?
You have to change your tactics.
Right, to say, hey, we're going to be more direct. It's not going to be intricate passing that gets us through. It's going to be playing for second balls in areas where we think we can win it and then apply pressure.
And
that's where I get a little frustrated.
Who does that come from? In the game, you've gone over this for the past week. It's on the tactics board. You start the game, and all of a sudden, your center backs, your keeper, your center backs are giving the ball away for fun. Who's it on 10 minutes in, 5 minutes in to say, guys, enough of the short passes, enough of what we talked about. Scrap it. Play it long. Play it into the channels, and let's win second balls, and let's recreate where we're going to start. And we're going to put pressure on them and see how they react. But Japan would play right through us. Saudi Arabia played right through us. We pressed Saudi Arabia. You look at minute 44 to minute 45. They literally got the ball in their defensive half, played it into a corner on the ground, and then U.S. came, connected 3 passes, long diagonal, connected another 3 passes, played right through us like hot butter. I could not believe it. So, yeah, you could say high line all you want, but if teams can play through you and you're giving the ball away,
that's fair.
Then that means nothing.
We don't have a backup left back on our locks.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Vines, does he sneak in here?
He didn't help himself. I can tell you that. I know we don't have many options, if any, if Sam Vines isn't there as a true left back, but he did not help himself.
No, and not playing in that second game, I think, shows that with no Jedi in this one. So it feels like you're going into the World Cup. Dest is that guy. And the question is, what do you do with the other roster spots? Do you pack in at right back and just have even more cover? Because if Dest has to play left and Yedlin goes down, then you want to have a backup to a backup. Is that what you do with that spot? Is there someone else with versatility? I can promise you this. Kellen Acosta plays there. We will lose in those games. He has not played there well at all for the U.S., but it feels like at this point it's Jedi and Dest. If Jedi's not healthy, now you're having a different conversation.
All right, midfield. Our locks are Adams, McKinney, Musa, Acosta, Luca De La Torre. There's not a Musa replacement. I don't even think I have to ask that question, right?
Nope.
So someone asked me this. If there's no Musa replacement, what's Luca De La Torre's role in this team?
He doesn't. They don't play the same at all.
But when Musa's So then when does Luca De La Torre play?
I would say in replace of Weston McKennie.
And is that not now Brendan Aronson or Gio Reyna?
And neither of those fit the bill. That's why I was pushing for Gio Reyna to be the more of a 10, the attacking midfielder in that trio. Weston McKennie is not a 10. He's not a 6. He's more of a defensive 8. Luca De La Torre is not a 6. You could argue he's a 10, but he's not a 10. I think he is a best third fiddle in the midfield in terms of, defending, attacking. And so for me,
he's a sub.
He's a player who
and that's not a knock on him. That's where he's going to be at his best when the game is more open.
But he wasn't
Yes,
against Saudi Arabia, right? Again, we got to look at the few things we have. He's a sub. He's not a starter. Aronson's playing the 10 for his team. Charlie, you want Reyna to play the 10 for this team. Now you start to look at the spots and say, and we'll get to the rest of the roster, but I think we go away from how does Luca De La Torre fit into the midfield and now say, is he one of the 3 best options from 23 to 26 to get on this roster? I thought he was a lock.
You think he's a starter in this team?
Who?
Luca De La Torre?
No. What I'm saying is I'm having conversations with people saying he's not on the roster.
Oh no, he's on the roster. He's going to Qatar.
He's played 10 minutes since he got to Spain.
You can guarantee it. He's going to Qatar.
I think it's telling people who didn't play at all against Saudi Arabia, especially a guy who's not playing for his club. You're not saving him for him to go there. And you say the same thing about Sam Vines, right? You say the same thing about Josh Sargent. Greg Berhalter showing his hand at some point.
I think when you're looking at the options and where Luca De La Torre is playing, because he brought him in when he's playing in Holland and for a team that got relegated.
But
now he's playing in La Liga, right? Well, he's playing for a team in La Liga. He gets minutes here and there, not enough, but he's going to be in the 26-man roster. Will he have any impact on the 3 games? Maybe, but he's definitely not going to be playing. He's not a super sub. If you're talking about a game where you're going to dictate possession and carry it, possibly against Iran he could come in. If that's the case, if they're really difficult to break down and you need to get somebody who's comfortable on the ball, who can play those side-to-side passes, that's Luca De La Torre's your guy. But if you're telling me north and south and covering ground, that first game against Japan, it looked like he was playing in slow motion. So no, he's not somebody who can come in and start and you can rely on to break up plays and get on the ball. That's not him. He's a side to side. Your team has possession and he can connect passes. That's when he's at his prime. So that's why I think he's still going, because he has that quality. But let's be real. How many of these games are the U.S. going to absolutely dominate where teams are going to be sitting back? The only one you can maybe argue is the last game if Iran has gotten some results, some surprise results, because they've been playing well. And they're going to defend first and invite U.S. to come in and say, come, play, keep your possession, and we're just going to look to counter.
Can you rely at all on Gio Reyna? Given the injury, unfortunate parade of injuries and tightness, precautions.
I don't think the roster's built to, right? And it's not.
And it shouldn't.
Yeah, and it's not like, oh, we take him, we don't take, like, you take Gio Reyna out of it, I think we're rolling out the same roster for the other 25 guys that we would whether he's in or out. So, yeah, can you rely on Gio Reyna? I don't know. That's why Brendan Aronson's an option on the wing. That's why Paul Arriola's coming to this World Cup, I'm pretty sure. That's why I think there's a chance Jordan Morris might be coming to this World Cup. That's, yes, this team's not built around Gio Reyna. It never has been, but it's better when he's out there.
Would you play Brendan Aronson as the 10 for the U.S., Charlie?
I think in this system, he finds a tough time in international play being the 10 because it's just so physical. And it's not as much space. Where he plays at Leeds, it's a lot more open space, a lot 1v1s. And in the international game, it's a lot more physicality and tackling. And that's just not for Brendan Aronson right now. So I wouldn't play him as a 10 in this system. I would not.
Would you then stick with MMA? Is it?
Yes, absolutely. Yunus Musa is your guy, and he's playing centrally for Valencia. He's just so gifted You're talking about we don't have players who can dribble out of pressure outside of Christian Pulisic, and Christian Pulisic hasn't been in form or fit, and he's not playing. Yunus Musa is your guy. And early on, I said, there's no end product with Yunus Musa. We haven't seen his ability to play balls into the box, take shots on goal. But I'm starting to see that now with Valencia. And he went from playing on the wing to playing in the middle. And Gennaro Gattuso, I think, is a perfect manager for him. This is our guy. We need Yunus Musa to be effective. And if Yunus Musa is effective, he will create space for the other attackers. So he is vital to this team.
Let's talk wingers then. Pulisic, Aronson, Weah, Reyna, Areola. Those are our locks. Can already hear the groaning for Paul Areola. What I would say to anybody who groans that way, you may not always love the final ball, sometimes the decision-making, but when he plays, he finds a way to affect the game. Whether it be with defensive pressure, whether it be just getting in positions to potentially have a chance to impact things in the attacking third, he is active. He always impacts games. You might get frustrated sometimes with the final product, but he will be there to provide it, and he will put other players' opponents in difficult spots. I think he's there. I think he has to be there. I think Greg trusts him. Can Pulisic be the man? Should we be asking him to be the man? It seems like a lot of pressure to be the man has been heaped on his shoulders from others, maybe a little bit from himself as well, and his own expectations, Charlie.
Christian
At this
Pulisic,
moment,
we just need him to be confident and fit. The fitness, I think, goes with the confidence because it's the hand in hand, getting playing time. Right now, he's struggling at Chelsea, and that can show in your play because you don't have a rhythm. For Christian to excel with the U.S., he needs time and space, and he needs to be set up in those positions on the pitch where he's in the attacking third and it's 1v1, or you're playing to him on the run. We've seen, against Morocco would be a good time to see and highlight his run in behind to create that goal for Brandon Aronson. That's when he is at his best, making runs, getting on the ball, being active, but not getting the ball deep in the midfield and trying to dribble 2 or 3 people and then playing. That's just not his game. And he gets cracked, he gets fouled, he gets injured. So just simplifying the game. That's when we'll see the best of Christian, when the game is simple. So I just hope come November he's got some more minutes under his belt and that he'll be higher up the pitch and less involved. I think that's when he'll be at his best.
forwards. Ferreira, Pepe, P-Fox / Sargent. Which side of the slash do you fall on, Dave?
I don't believe that Pepe solidified his spot in the World Cup. I think Greg Berhalter said, hey, man, I back you. Go out and perform and back me, and he didn't. So I understand he's at Groningen now, and if he scores 10 goals in the next 10 games, great. He's going to the World Cup, but I can't guarantee that. And to me, when I look at this team, I've said a couple times, I think guys are fighting for different roles. It's not who are the three forwards. It's who's your potent goal scorer that doesn't do a lot in the build-up, who's your guy who you're going to play through their feet when they drop deep, who's your guy who's going to relieve pressure as your outlet. I think P-Fox and Pepe are, for the most part, playing for the same role. And Pepe took the step back this week, and he gave up the opportunity to decide his future. And so I think P-Fox going to the World Cup at this point, if he continues scoring at his rate, and I think it could be in place of Ricardo Pepi.
Jesus Ferreira is locked in. He's going to the World Cup. And right now, he's your number one striker. Ricardo Pepi did not take that chance. And unfortunately, Josh Sargent didn't get a proper run out at 9, even though he's been in form and consistent. And with that substitution appearance, didn't turn any heads and didn't really do anything to kind of push his name into a final spot for the roster. So in my mind, there's a lot of similarities with the strikers. Jordan Pefok, if he continues to score and he's healthy and fit for a team that's competing for a Champions League spot in the Bundesliga, you have to bring him. You have to. Because no one's scoring. And he's scoring. And it was always, oh, he's scoring in Switzerland, not the best league. And, you can't really put too much stock in it. Now you have to put stock in it because he's not playing for Bayern Munich. He's not playing for Dortmund. He's playing for Union Berlin, and he's the team's at the top of the Bundesliga, and he's scoring. Now, yes, he doesn't play well in a single striker system because he can't dribble. He's not the best dribbler. He's not the best with the ball at his feet, but he's a goal scorer. He gets in the box, big body, and that's what you need. You need a goal scorer, and he's doing it in one of the top leagues in the world. You bring him. Because there might be a situation where you got to play with two strikers or a withdrawn striker. And guess what? He's your guy. You're down a goal, put him in, go with two up top, and you're going to start creating chances. And you can bet on someone who's in form in the Bundesliga, given an opportunity in the World Cup, to finish. Yeah, he got his chance in Mexico, but we've all fluffed chances. All the strikers in the world have had opportunities where they have regrets. They should have finished. But he's still put his head down and he's working and he's doing it in the Bundesliga. So bring him. That's my take. As long as he's healthy and still playing, he's got to go. He's got to be in Qatar.
All right, we kick Charlie out. Get out of here, Charlie. He has things to do. He's a busy man. So he won't be around to help Dave and I determine the last two spots. We've gone through 24. I know we've had some disagreement here. That's okay. That's part of this process. That's that's the reality of where the U.S. is at. If things were all going well, we might all be on the same page, but realistically, we know that not to be true as well. So let's try to get the last two spots nailed down, Dave. We have Jordan Morris in the running. We have Eric Palmer-Brown in the running. Mick Tillman is there. Christian Roldan. I want to throw Eric Williamson in. Reggie Cannon, I think, is obviously there. Maybe Sam Vines, maybe Joe Scally. We need two spots. Where are the places on this roster, as we've currently laid it out, that need the most reinforcement in your mind?
Because we decided on three forwards already, right?
We think there will be three forwards. We did not agree on the three.
Okay, but we have three. Okay.
Correct.
So I actually think with the injury to Reggie Cannon, obviously it feels like Sam Vines did not play his way in. I still think one of them is at fullback, or at least along the back line to give more flexibility. Because right now you're in a situation where, let's say Jedi goes down, Dest is your left back, Yedlin's your right back. You don't have a backup fullback on this roster. So I would be shocked, especially with how strong that position is for the U.S., that there's not another player in there. And then the last spot becomes, do you want to do that combo first?
Yeah, who is it, though?
So I think if healthy, it's Reggie Cannon still. He came out injured against Japan, didn't play against Saudi Arabia. They're saying it's a few weeks. That is going to be the caveat with every conversation now because the timeline is so tight. I don't think Joe Scally played his way out.
I don't think so either.
And I think Joe Scally playing in the Bundesliga has a chance to continue to play his way in. And his flexibility is a factor. I get that Dest is now the guy on the left. But what if Serginho Dest goes down? Right? Or what if you look at the matchup and you say, we need Serginho on the right?
Suspension. What if there's just a suspension and you're digging down the depth chart?
And these are things we forget when you think back about World Cup teams. You always think of the best 11. And when you dig into games, you realize how rotated teams end up having to be because of the pace of games, because of, as you said, suspension, because of injuries, whatever it is. So I think Scally is still in this running. And I think he probably took a step forward this week with his, being trusted by Berhalter against Saudi Arabia, his performance against them, as well as the lack of performance from a Sam Vines.
I think I'm with you. I think as it stands now, if healthy, it'll be Reggie. If it's not Reggie, I personally, right now, though I love me some Sam Vines, it seems like in Belgium everything is going swimmingly. I think maybe Joe Scally, better prepared, has shown he's better prepared for that moment. I don't know. That's a big question mark. I do agree with you. It'll be on the back line. What about? Is it CCV? What about Eric Palmer-Brown? Does he have a chance to get in here?
I think 100%.
I just need to say Twa, just because we've learned this. But I could see him getting over CCV. The thing that's disappointing is it feels like every time he has an opportunity to make an impact on the national team, health gets in the way for him, as it does for so many on this team.
But right, remember, I'll go all the way back to 2002, right? John O'Brien stayed healthy for 6 weeks, and it was the 6 weeks around the World Cup. If that's what hits for him, that's great. The other thing is he does have some flexibility. He could play three in the back with him. He could play D-mid if you were in a giant pinch and you needed him to. He has done it at the youth national team level, at least. So he gives a little bit of that. I think that's why James Sands is also still in the conversation. He started in the Gold Cup final for Greg Berhalter a year ago. It was telling that he doesn't come into this roster. But as I've said, I don't think you can play poorly in 2 games here and then say, well, if you're not in the team, you're not in the team. Like, the team underperformed. So for guys who are out, the door is now still open for them to get back in.
Other spot.
So the other spot is multiple conversations. It's where are you willing to use Brendan Aronson? It's where are you willing to use Gio Reyna? It's then the risk if Gio Reyna is a central piece of moving him around that you feel in bringing him in his health. And then that opens up the conversation of where is that spot. So if Aronson's a winger and you don't believe in Reyna's ability to either play the 10 or be healthy, I think Christian Roldan right now makes this roster because Malik Tillman didn't take a step forward. Roldan looked great last night for Seattle. I understand it's off the bench and against FC Cincinnati at home, but still, you want people being positive. And it's been proven, I think, that Roldan is a positive force on this team culturally in the locker room and that Greg Berhalter values him there, plus his flexibility. But if Aronson is the 10 or the next center mid in and Reyna is, and you trust them, Jordan Morris gives you the biggest ability to change the game. He is a weapon unlike the other ones in your roster if you have the open position to bring someone at the end.
I have a feeling it will end up being Morris because I think, again, to go back to health and to form, the fact that Timo Weah just straight up is not playing right now, and it seems like he's back into training. Maybe that could change. I hope so much could change fitness-wise. He just, if you don't have Morris, who do you have that can stretch the game off the bench?
But I would ask you, though, right now, in a vacuum, if I said Way is injured and someone has to start in place of him, would you say Areola or Morris?
I would say Areola.
Right. So Morris is still one step behind the Timo Weah replacement.
Yeah. I would say more. I'm saying more in terms of profile late in game. How do you change a game when you go to your bench?
And I look at the Japan game, and I would say if it wasn't a friendly where you're trying to learn things and it's do or die and the team needed it, I think Jordan Morris probably would have been subbed in the first half because Greg Berhalter would have said, I have 5 subs, I have to change something. And he brings that element, as you said, that no one else does on this team with Weah out. And so I agree with you, and I think he is that very specific weapon that you know what he can do well. Will the finishing be there? I don't know. Obviously, if they don't make the playoffs for Seattle, that takes away an opportunity for him to prove himself and be sharper. But he has done it for Greg Berhalter. He's been trusted by him, and he's done it in big moments. He's done it in the CCL final. He's done it in MLS Cups. He's done it in the playoffs. That's as much as you can ask for at this point.
I think there are 3 sort of bubble spots in what we're looking at. And we could be dead wrong. We could look like idiots, no doubt about it. One is that 4th center back, or the 5th center back, I guess you would call it. That's Carter Vickers or Eric Palmer Brown. I think those are probably the 2 that you're looking at in that spot. Well, we have Mark McKenzie as technically our 4th center back.
Oh, we
Long, Richard, Zimmerman.
Got it.
So that could be another spot where instead of CCV or EPB, a lot of 3-letter acronyms here, you could bring a Cannon. I mean, I could see Cannon being that guy because he provides more versatility to go to the 3 or to play right back. And then it's a question of whether you take the extra center back or you go another outside back. In that case, I think you probably go another outside back. The math is it's not going to be fun for Greg Berhalter and that staff right now, especially given injuries and form for so many of these players. But I don't think we came to a clear consensus. But we have a ways to go till November 9th, so maybe we'll discuss this again at a later date. Before we get to Joshua Kloke in Canada, and it's much more positive, I promise, folks. It is an amazing conversation with him about his new book and so much more from this international window with Canada and what they're going to expect in Qatar. Will the U.S. get out of the group, Dave?
I still say yes. I still look at a team, as I said at the beginning, I still look at a team that I think has risen to challenges when it's been about matching energy and when it's been about performing in big moments. Can they elevate the game against an El Salvador? No, they can't at times. But they have elevated their game to Mexico, to the big crowds, to finals. And so I think that's what you'll see against Wales. I think that's what you'll see against England. And that's where you put yourself in the driver's seat against Iran. I watched the Iran-Uruguay game. Iran wasn't good, but they sat in. They stayed composed. It was a middle Uruguay side. And then they have match winners up top now in Taremi and Osmun. And so Taremi scores the goal, but so that game I think is a little bit of a different flow. But when I watch Wales this week and when I think about the way this U.S. team has played, I do think that with pressure on other opponents and with the atmosphere and the energy around what's going on, I do think that these individuals will elevate their game, and I think there will be a sort of rebound that we wanted to see in this window, but we didn't in an empty stadium in Spain in a game that didn't matter against Saudi Arabia, but I think we will against Wales.
I think and I hope that Greg Berhalter is going to look at these two matches and think, I have to simplify a little bit. I can't put my players in positions where they're just blatantly uncomfortable. And it can't be from minute one. It can't be we're going to change in the 15th or 20th. We're going to adapt. I think from minute one, you've got to put, and sort of go back to what Christian said, the guys in positions where they can feel like they can be aggressive. Any part of the game. I'm not saying 100%. I'm not saying go Red Bulls press people. I'm not saying go, run it down their throat, but you have to understand, okay, here are the things that we think will be our strengths. How do we get those players in those positions as much as possible? And he kept talking about personality. That's where personality comes out. At least the kind of personality we want to see. We don't want to see the flip side of tentative play, of being unsure about what to do with the ball or who they can rely on or what they should even be doing in a certain situation because they didn't solve those problems on the field themselves. Just didn't happen. I hope it gets simplified. I think on that stage that will benefit everyone. And I think I'm with you that the U.S. still gets out. But I think it's a roller coaster. I don't think it's like a straightforward, big result, good vibes, everything is perfect. I think there's going to have to be a scrappiness to it, and I think that fits the personality of this team in their best moments. When they've had to scrap, when they've had to fight, when they've been sort of counted out, that's when they've shown up the most. And maybe this is just me after 8 years of World Cup dry spell being hopeful. I hope I'm right.
It's also It's also the nature of getting there. Once you're there, things can happen, right? Pepe gets hot. Pulisic finds his form. Bale
all it takes is one cross. That's all it takes.
Yeah. And that's sort of what you've seen in the past, and that's why 2018 hurts so much, because if you're not there, well, none of that's possible. And so I felt more hopeful a week or two ago. I felt more like, oh, my God, this team gets out of the group. Who knows, right? Playing against the ball, against the Netherlands or a Senegal, these young players sort of showing what Weston McKennie, as I say again and again for Juve, has performed at his best in the biggest games, scoring at the Camp Nou, scoring against PSG, showing up in big games. Tyler Adams scoring for Leipzig in a Champions League knockout stage game. Pulisic scoring in a Champions League semifinal. Aronson stepping on the field against Bayern Munich or stepping on the field for the first time for Leeds and playing at his best. These players have shown they can do that in those moments. The question is, can they get there? It's a different test than Canada. Canada needs to hold the fort and be able to support Fonzie against the best teams in the world. The U.S. needs to control the game against Iran and Wales and win and set themselves up. And that is the question mark for the U.S.
I just hope that control the game doesn't mean building out of the back all the time. I hope it means controlling in what parts of the field the game is played.
Man, Weavy, you really sat across from Greg Berhalter and you felt scorned.
No, I don't feel scorned. I just thought I feel like maybe I misunderstood, honestly. I'm like, maybe I didn't understand what Greg was saying to me. It's entirely possible. I don't know.
Maybe he told you you're going to change the way the world perceives American soccer before?
No, she tells me I could be a better listener. So
okay,
maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, maybe that's the deal there. All right, that's the U.S. for us. Let us know what you think. We're going to be back on Thursday with more MLS. But for now, Canadian soccer, where it is decidedly more positive. All right, I think we've exhausted basically everything to talk U.S. men's national team. Let's talk Canada, where things are decidedly more positive. It's an AT&T 5G call to the field. Joshua Kloke is with us. He has a wonderful book that is out that I am about to get my hands on, Dave. I heard that you, on the other side, just finished it.
Classic ECR book club.
It's back, baby.
Yeah.
We could do this. We should do this. Charlie,
David reads the book. Weeby crams 35 pages the morning of and goes,
that's not true.
Yeah,
do not slander me. Do not slander me. I always read every single word.
Any of the book.
That's false. We'll take this offline. Charlie, how's your are you a big reader, Charlie? Could we get you in on the book club or what do you think here?
Yeah, I'm forced to read. So,
Well, we won't force anybody to read the Voyagers, the Canadian men's soccer team's quest for the World Cup. But if you want to go support Joshua Kloke's book and his efforts, I really recommend doing so. Anything that Dave reads and recommends, I'll read 35 pages of. So I'll get right on that. Joshua, what's up, man? How's it going?
Doing well. 35 pages with the conversion rate. That's about 8 pages here in Canada. So I'll take it.
I only read sword content, so as long as there's lots of sword content.
There's not just a
Well,
sword.
hold on, Dave.
Dave,
Don't give away too much here. What are we doing?
Fair.
Well, you're here to tease. You're here to get sales.
Here's what I
Josh.
can tell you. The sword became the story after Costa Rica, but I was surprised and also enthralled to learn that the sword was only a piece of the medieval kind of warfare tactics that John Herdman employed with his men's national team. It's and that's just one of the many stories in the book. So again, if you get 8 pages through, Weeby, that would be an honor for me.
Is there a Black Death aspect of that medieval history?
I feel like that might be in the sequel, maybe.
No plague. Okay, got it. Yeah, okay. All right, let's talk Canada. Overall window, thoughts, takeaways, 2-0 win against Qatar, and then a 2-0 loss against Uruguay.
I don't know how much we really learned from the 2-0 win against Qatar. I mean, Qatar didn't really kind of force the issue. They were more than comfortable to let Canada have the ball. I think that if there was any positives from that game, it was just how much synergy, they kind of developed in the midfield because, their last window in June was just a wash for a variety of reasons. So to come out of that first game and feel like some of the players developed better relationships on the pitch, I think is a positive. But everybody, including the team themselves, were looking at the game against Uruguay as the real measuring stick game. And I think they can come away from that game feeling good, feeling confident, not necessarily feeling great. I mean, obviously the result itself stings, but to me, the only difference in that game was finishing. Canada had more possession. They had more shots on target. They had more corners. And they went at Uruguay for 90 minutes. I think there was some speculation leading up to the game that, against a team of Uruguay's quality, maybe Canada would be more comfortable backing off the ball. But they didn't. They went full throttle for 90 minutes. And I think that's encouraging for John Herdman, considering, he's about to deploy a team to play some really talented sides in Belgium and Croatia. And I think you can come away from this game disappointed about the result, but kind of encouraged that when you play some of the best teams on the planet, you will be comfortable going after the game and trying to dictate the tempo of the game, right?
So explain something to me, because I was a little bit interested before these games, the way that Herdman was talking. He had an interview where he was like, hey, look, the gap is here. Like, we're not there. We've got to figure it out. We're going to the World Cup without really knowing what we are. And then they go toe-to-toe with Uruguay. Like, how big is that gap? And did he address that afterwards in any way?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with John Herdman is, first of all, a caveat, I guess. He is about as savvy a manager with the media in particular as I think exists. He crafts his message long ahead of games. He knows exactly what he's going to say. And I think those of us that have been following him for some time know that he drops nuggets, but a lot of what he says is crafted in a specific way. So I think maybe in the lead up, saying that there was a huge gap between his team and the likes of Uruguay and Croatia, for example, I mean, that could just be kind of dousing the flames a little bit, lowering the expectations. But look, I think what Canada did well through qualifying, and you guys saw this, their tactical versatility was evident, right? When they were in Nashville.
Could you repeat that again? Because I don't know if Goss heard that one. Could you say that a little bit louder?
Charlie's upset with me because I questioned John Herdman. So Charlie got on the Canada train like 4 minutes ago, and now Charlie's the only one
4
who
minutes
can
ago,
dictate what we're allowed to say about Canada.
But they gave him one of those little. They gave him one of those little conductor hats, Dave.
Yeah. No,
I know
I'm
he
sorry.
watched all the coverage of World Cup qualifying, and I was on the Canada train a long time ago.
Okay, cool.
Did you not think they like throughout qualifying they were able to roll out different looks?
Oh, no, 100%. And I think inside of games, and we saw it against Uruguay, and we're seeing it even more now with Alistair Johnston's flexibility, that they have multiple ways they can change the game. But I still go back to the Panama game, that first half, them being off, and the way John Herdman, I think, did too much. he came out and he was trying to do too much in the game, and he readjusted and they readjusted. And then you look at it across qualifying, I thought there was a couple times, and that doesn't go to the flexibility. I think the flexibility actually saves them, and it's a credit to him. I think there are times where he overthought things going into games, overcomplicated things, and took them out of their element. They got better at it as qualifying went along. That's what I said, and I worry about you can only get 3 games at a World Cup. If you make a mistake in the first half against Belgium, you might be out. Charlie was unhappy with me.
In the weeks after the qualifying, I know for a fact John Herdman kind of had debriefing sessions with every one of his players, and he asked them, what did you think and how do you think we could succeed in the World Cup? And what he heard from a resounding number of players is we have to go after games. We're young, we're fast, we don't play well when we have the shackles on us, because there's an energy. You guys see it. There's an energy with this men's national team, and we talk about the brotherhood and all these cliches, but there's an energy with this team, and they know that kind of fearless attitude that they have can be used to their advantage only if they go after games. So I think that's probably the takeaway. The qualifying was a chance to try all these different looks, and you come to the end and you're like, well, what was the best look? It's when we just went for things.
I would say, watching this group, what sticks out to me is why they're so dangerous is the pace that they have. In Alphonso Davies to Tejan Buchanan to Richie Larea to Adekube, even Alistair Johnson at times. I'm thinking you can hurt opponents easily on the counter if that's what you want to do. But we talk about the flexibility that John Herdman has given this team. I mean, he lines up in Mexico, in Azteca, to get that epic draw in a 4-2-3-1. Then he switches to a 4-4-2 against the U.S. to win at home against Canada. And then into a 3-4-3 against Mexico to win at home. And I just think, man, when a manager has an understanding of his group and the strengths of his group, the team excels. So my question to you is, what's their flaw? Heading into the World Cup, yes, they have the group of death. Everyone knows that. I see them getting out. I think they're going to shock a lot of people. What's their flaw? What do they have to worry about heading into the World Cup?
Well, I mean, there's a few things they have to worry about. I would say first and foremost, first of all, was the notion of John Herdman understanding his players and their strengths. Like, was that a vicious subtweet at Greg Berhalter? Like, am I a little later?
No, no, not at all. This was not a shot at.
It's rare that Canadians get to feel like we're on top of the world, but
take it in
for
while
real.
you can.
I think that in terms of their flaw, what we saw at times throughout Uruguay, look, if Canada's going to play in a 3-4-3, which it looks like they will with a double pivot midfield, they don't have the pace or the kind of prowess, I think, in a two-man midfield to cover the center of the park well. And look at what Belgium and Croatia have, some of the most talented central midfielders on the planet. So if those two teams play really direct and try to play through the middle of the park, I mean, look, I think it's time that Canadians or people around the world start envisioning a scenario in which Sam Piette is starting in a World Cup game, which we can shake our heads, we can say how, but I don't know if Atiba Hutchinson is going to be fit enough. I hope he is. I'm 39 years old. I want to see a 39-year-old play in the World Cup. Atiba Hutchinson should be, he should be replacing the Queen on the money in Canada. I mean all of that, but it's possible that his bone bruise, the recovery from that injury it hurts his World Cup chances of starting. I think Sam Piette did a job against. I think he's having a great season for Montreal, but the flaw there is that, as good a job as he doesn't have the pace. And in the central midfield, I thought against Uruguay,
and quality.
Yeah, I think that's a place that they could be hurt because the strength of this team is in their wide areas, and the flaw is in the middle, I guess.
What's the math for Herdman in the middle right now? And what's the math on Atiba in his mind? It's got to be super unclear. And that has to be a little bit worrying given the place he occupies, not just in sort of Canada lore, but, I mean, truly in big games, in big moments, I don't think there was any doubt it was going to be Atiba if he was fit and available.
And if he's fit, he's in my starting 11, right? And I have a story, kind of a recap of the the entire window coming out at the Athletic, and I have him starting. If he's fit and healthy, I have him starting against Belgium. You just have to. You need his presence. You need his smarts. But in terms of the equation in the middle, he has part of the equation down in Stefan Eustaquio, who to me has kind of solidified himself, emerged as one of the best central midfielders in CONCACAF. He didn't look out of place at all starting his first Champions League games for Porto a few weeks back. And I think you have a player there that is going to be Canada's most consistently important player. Not necessarily their best. That's Alphonso Davies' title for as long as he wants it. But in terms of a team that's going to rely on their transition game, you need a guy in the middle to get that kind of party started. That's Stefan Eustaquio. The second player in the midfield, again, Sam Piet started the first 2 games. I think in terms of a player that emerged as someone that I don't know if he's ready to start yet, but could be a really effective super sub for 30 minutes, 20-year-old Ismail Kone, who has had a lights-out season for Montreal. Montreal is kind of the key to this whole success story for Canada right now. But I think Ismail Kone in this window showed that he's not afraid to play at this level. He's so silky on the ball. He can turn off defenders really well. He can play a great final pass. And I think John Herdman's trust in the player, even at 20 years old, is really, really growing.
And when you talk about Eustaquio, I watched the game against Uruguay, and I think he did a lot of the things he does well. The issue with Sam Piet next to him versus Atiba, and I would go to Marc-Anthony Kaye, who's no longer injured, but has not put himself in a place to be a starter in this group, and also losing Jonathan Osorio, was how isolated Eustaquio was in trying to play and manage the attack. And he talked a lot in the post game about his work on the left with Adekugbe and Kamal Miller and Alphonso Davies, and said if we could do the same on the right, then we're dominating games the way we want to. That was Sam Piet on the right. And I thought Piet had a good game against Uruguay in that he showed he could be at the level, and he showed that they're not going to lose games because he's out there. But those small margins that get you a win or a result over Belgium, Croatia, and Morocco in a World Cup, they lost those margins yesterday, and a lot of it was Sam Piet's lack of ability to play with the ball, which allows Eustaquio, I think, to find more parts of the field because he knows there's someone deeper who can pick it up and find him when he floats off that left side and finds more of the game. So I thought that was a real loss yesterday because, as you say, Josh, this team ticks through him. And we saw it in the Gold Cup last year without Alphonso Davies. He was the central force of this team. He led them. But he did it alongside Osorio and Kaye, and he's done it alongside Atiba. And if you don't have those guys, I don't know that you have the platform for Eustaquio to be at his best, which puts Canada at their best.
Yeah, look, it's tricky, but we shouldn't just pile on Sam Piet. I think he did a job. I think he made a lot of simple, smart, effective passes that showed he could keep his head well above water. But you mentioned this to me in terms of like areas for concern. Again, it's these little moments that Canada really got punished at, right? Alistair Johnston just giving Darwin Nunez just a touch, and I mean a touch, too much space. And he gets over Alistair Johnston very easily for Uruguay's second goal. It's stuff like that where you can see the gap between these really good teams and the teams in CONCACAF that Canada's played. They don't need a lot of time and space to punish Canada. And again, flaws, I still worry about Canada's center back depth. They're going to go, we know who their 3 center backs are, and each of them have really kind of individual and strong qualities. I mean, Kamal Miller has emerged as a terrific ball-playing center back. Him having a left foot and his kind of confidence to play the ball out of the back is important. Stephen Vittoria, kind of always a walking yellow card, but he does have that presence in the back. And Alistair Johnston, again, that one mistake was probably the first mistake or clear mistake he's made in months. But after that, the drop-off is pretty serious to me. Scott Kennedy he's having, let's call it an up and down season in Jan Regensburg in the second division in Germany. And then we're talking about Daniil Henry, whose playing time for Toronto FC has been limited. So I worry about over-relying on those 3 center backs. I mean, the quality is there, they're trusted, but that's another area of concern for me. Once you get kind of higher up the pitch, there's probably only one reason to worry, but to me, no real reasons to worry on the flanks and in the attack. So again, I think you can feel confident coming out of this window because the goal was to prove that you can hang with teams outside of CONCACAF. And I don't know if we can debate that they do belong, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what we heard from them after the game. I think Herdman's quote was, "I'm smiling on the inside, I'm pained on the outside." Like, he knew they played a game that they could beat Uruguay, which we didn't know was possible or would be what happened, but they also didn't. And it feels like that was the takeaway from that game, is maybe a little bit of an opportunity missed, but it feels like the confidence in the group is there, which is all you can ask for going into Japan and then mainly Belgium, is just being at that all-time high confidence. One of the question marks coming into the camp was Kyle Larin. He doesn't start right now. I thought he was the MVP of qualifying with his flexibility and his availability. He scores against Qatar, less effective against Uruguay. Did he solidify that spot, or was it already solidified?
I think it was already solidified, and I don't know if a real challenger has emerged for the spot either. And I think that's the thing to remember here is Kyle Larin's not playing a lot for Club Brugge. He's started to get more and more minutes. He has one goal for them so far this season after a summer transfer. Him scoring and not needing a lot of time to convert his chance against Qatar is good. And he's Canada's all-time leading goal scorer. And there is a trust there. He is able to raise his game at times for Canada. But even when he faltered against Uruguay, and I thought he was kind of... I thought his shot selection against Uruguay was poor, kind of taking shots without fully turning and looking at goal, and that was an area of concern for me. But look, Ike Ugbo, who's kind of, he was a late kind of addition to this Canadian team through qualifying. We know he originally, said he would play for Nigeria, and then he's convinced to come and play for Canada. The potential there is huge. But I thought he just, missed too many opportunities in both games. And John Herdman gave him opportunities. He used him as a substitute in both games. But I don't know if he's fully emerged as a bona fide starting option. Lucas Cavallini, I think, has a lot of respect from John Herdman. He's one of his kind of most trusted lieutenants in a lot of ways. But he doesn't play at all. And he hasn't played for weeks after the red card and the suspension for the Whitecaps. After that, your options at number 9 are fall right off. So I think it's Kyle Larin's spot, but not necessarily because he won a lot of people over in the window.
So Josh, I have a question. If you have the 26 spots, how many of those spots do you think are solidified? How many is there wiggle room for, a Luka Koleosho to get on there and, maybe get an appearance at the World Cup? Like who in your mind, how many spots are
This
available?
is super interesting to me because I read obviously our boy Sam and Paul's work at The Athletic all the time, and their predicted roster seems to change a lot. That's not the case for Canada. Like, I have 22 or 23 guys set, and I've had those 22 or 23 guys set for months now, right? A part of that, I think, is just the talent pool is not nearly as deep. And part of that is John Herdman really trusting a lot of players. And even if a Lucas Cavallini hasn't been playing, and a few months ago we could say this about Sam Piette, right? People were sort of down on Sam Piette, but those are the kind of guys that are in the squad. So I have 22 guys going. I think some of the guys on the bubble are your Liam Millars, who's having a great season for Basel, but didn't play in the international window. Doesn't always elevate his game for Canada. I think there's a world that Luka Koleosho does go. I think there's a reason that he showed up to this second camp after a really tumultuous June camp. I think it's rare to have an 18-year-old who's already getting minutes, limited, but minutes nonetheless in La Liga. And I think John Herdman has to have at least a part of his vision kind of looking towards 2026. And I don't know if Luka Koleosho's spot would come at the expense of a more proven player. Joel Waterman with CF Montreal, again, having a great season, gets the call up for this window, doesn't play. I think he's one of those bubble players. But really, after that, I don't know how many spots are open. I think if you're John Herdman, you knew kind of going into this camp, you're probably full 26-man roster. You were just looking to kind of put those players into different tiers and see who can emerge as a starter and who isn't, who can't. The only thing I would add to that is fitness, right? Atiba Hutchinson will be rolled. If he's hurt, he'll still be rolled onto the field. Like Atiba Hutchinson will play in this World Cup. That's one of the few reasons I think we would revolt in Canada is if Atiba Hutchinson doesn't play. And Jonathan Osorio, to me, is like, he's been very public about the kind of the neurological dysfunction that he's been suffering from. And I am as big a backer of Jonathan Osorio as you'll find. I think he'll be there, but you just hope he's fit enough to hopefully make a start as well. Other than that, I know it's not really dramatic, but the roster to me is pretty much set.
How about the starting 11 against Belgium? I heard you tease it, man. I've been trying to put the pieces together as I hear you talk.
It's not all that different from the starting. There was only one change in the two starting 11s for Qatar and Uruguay. And to me, it's pretty much set. To me, it's going to be a 3-4-3 with Milan Borjan. It's his goal as long as he wants to play. And that back three of Miller, Vittoria, and Johnston is going to be unchanged. I have Sam Adekugbe on the left in a wingback role. I mean, I don't know if any Canadian player's stock rose as high through qualifying as Sam Adekugbe.
Big question on the right.
On the right, for me, it's got to be Tajon Buchanan. I think, especially in a game against Belgium, go for it. And I wouldn't have said that a few months ago. But just go for it. Let these guys go because you have some depth on that side as well. But if Tajon Buchanan is ready to go, I mean, he played a little bit in the second half yesterday, and his quality on the ball, his dribbling, his creativity especially is something that I think will be difficult to game plan for. In the middle, I have Stefan Eustáquio, and if Atiba Hutchinson is fit, he's playing. I really think Canada need that kind of poise and presence to kind of mark some of Belgium's midfielders. And then up top, Davies on the left, no surprise there. Kyle Larin in the number 9 role, and Jonathan David on the right, but also with that kind of license to drift into the middle of the park and play a bit of a second striker role. So that's who I'd go with. Perhaps Tajon Buchanan is used as kind of a super sub, but I just think what we saw from him throughout qualifying, you got to get him on the field as much as possible. So that's my starting 11. I don't know if you guys have any issues with that.
I don't.
I carbon copy. I would copy paste with that starting 11.
And that's my assumption on the starting 11. I thought it was interesting. Yesterday we did our watch along show with Patrice Bernier, and he brought up, and I don't think he's wrong in wondering, and we've seen it a couple times through qualifying, if just making Alphonso Davies a quote-unquote wingback so he has the runway to get into his space the way he does with Bayern just makes the game easier for him. And in that scenario, you're probably pushing Tajon up. It's the same players on the field. His point yesterday was Junior Hoylett was playing out there where he plays for Reading. Bring him inside, let him get on the ball in tight spaces in the middle, and let Fonzie just run and have the space. And if you do so on either side, both of the quote-unquote center backs, Kamal Miller and Alistair Johnson, are guys who can defend in space and guys who can cover that space. And you saw yesterday, right? Kamal Miller was playing as a left back half the time, and Alistair Johnson's playing as a right back with the way they shift. That's one thought, and I would doubt they would do it for, to open with. It's probably something you shift into as a game goes along. And the other one is I do think Jonathan Osorio changes the way they play. And that's where the Kyle Larin space, to me, is, does Jonathan David start at center forward? So Oso can play as a 10, and that, one, unleashes Fonzie to do whatever he wants, and two, you get a runner coming from deeper. You have someone to play off in midfield and a guy who presses very well. And those would be the only two things I would see. Again, saying I assume what you just put out there, if everyone's healthy, is the starting lineup.
Well, Goss, I mean, I know it's your goal to make people's dreams come true, and starting Jonathan Osorio as a number 10 in a World Cup game, this is a player that wanted that number 10 role before Victor Vasquez was brought into TFC in 2017. This is a player that has always kind of envisioned himself in part as a number 10.
Also a player who scored the game-tying goal at the Azteca, or the go-ahead goal at the Azteca for Canada out of the...
And also a player that is at his best when the tempo of the game is a little bit slower. And I don't know if that's exactly what John Herdman wants to do. Maybe you can do that against a Morocco where you might have as much or more of the possession than you would against Croatia or Belgium. And I do think there's a world, if he's fully healthy, that there's a world where Jonathan Osorio starts. But that's a game where you have to be a little bit more manipulative, whereas I think against Belgium and Croatia, if that game against Uruguay was any indication, they're going to go for it. They're going to play full throttle. They're going to perhaps leave themselves exposed to counterattacks through the middle of the park. And Jonathan Osorio is at his best when he can kind of slow things down, be precise with his movements, be deliberate with his movements. There's a time and a place for that, and I don't know if it's a World Cup opener.
It occurs to me that almost 25 minutes in, really the first time we've dug into Alphonso Davies and his role is at this point in the interview, which says something about sort of what we take for granted with Alphonso. Before this tournament, tell me about the place he occupies in not just Canadian sporting culture, but Canadian culture overall, what the expectations are on him for this World Cup, and how you see it going for what I think we all understand and know to be the best player, the most important player.
He's
on this
not
team.
yet a household name in Canada, but I think he will be after the World Cup, right? And I should say as well, I think Canada's games at the World Cup will draw Super Bowl type numbers. I think there's enough interest here, and I think the team's kind of games are on favorable enough points, and I think that lines up well for, the likes of Alphonso Davies to kind of reach true superstar status in Canada. I think his story is very compelling for a lot of Canadians, being a refugee, coming to Canada without, a support system at all, and kind of rising because of the opportunities that he was given by people in Edmonton's community. I think there's a number of kind of Canadian players that have kind of a similar story, and I think that's what I like the most about this Canadian team, is that their stories should resonate with Canadians, and the makeup of this team looks like the makeup of most Canadian cities, if that makes sense. This is a team that's very representative, with refugees, with immigrants, with people of color. And my hope is that Alphonso Davies, again, his story resonates with more and more Canadians, and that especially young Canadians, right? Because I think that's what's been lacking in Canadian soccer, on the men's side for so long, is a true superstar that a young player can look at and say, if he came from my backyard, I can stay in the sport and I can keep going as well. Because Canada has never had that on the men's side, and it's that kind of player. And if Alphonso Davies does, I should say too, I think he's going to have a game in the World Cup. I think there will be one game that he completely takes over. And if Canada has any hope of getting a win, it's going to be dependent on Alphonso Davies taking over. If he can take over a game, score the kind of goal he did against Panama in qualifying, that's the kind of moment that I think Canadian pop consciousness could really latch onto. And that could see the sport really progress into the upper echelon of the Canadian sports landscape.
Josh, I love the book. I already told you that multiple times. I would tell everyone to go out, read it, Voyagers, all the way from 1986 to now. And there's a lot of different story arcs. One we've talked about a little bit, and I got to dig in a little more with Patrice Bernier about this yesterday, is you have a segment about the 2007 Gold Cup and Stephen Hart, and sort of unleashing at what you just talked about with this team of the true identity of these players from different backgrounds who didn't want to play in English style and wanted to feel themselves on the field. I didn't understand, I think, until I read the book, and I want you to talk a little bit more about it, of how that sort of led us to where this team can have this success, and sort of the shift that happened culturally to allow these players to be their best selves.
I mean, for a variety of reasons, probably because we are part of the Commonwealth, and because so many of managers of the men's national team were either Canadian or from England or Scotland. Canada always imposed a very rigid, defensive, and let's be honest, boring style of play. Their team at the 1986 World Cup, where the book begins, didn't have a lot of quality, and so the manager then, Tony Waiters, said, we're going to be the fittest team in this World Cup, and we're just going to run. And they did. but they didn't score a goal. And I think for so long, and you can even move forward to the 2000 Gold Cup winning team, really impressive results, really aesthetically unpleasing football to watch, like painfully boring at times. They would rely so heavily on set piece goals. And there's one of my favorite quotes in the book is from Nick Dasovic, who said that, Canadian teams would always play a 4-4-2 with 4 defenders and then 4 more defenders up front. And I just think that was so indicative of the way Canada always wanted to play. And if I can be completely honest, man, that was the way I was taught to play growing up as a player in Canada too. And when Stephen Hart comes in, Stephen Hart, grew up outside of Canada. And when he comes to Canada and he rises through the Canadian kind of ranks and eventually takes over the national team, he wanted to cull all these different influences from around the world that the players had at the time, right? The players were really embodying that multiculturalism and diversity that is a hallmark of Canadian culture. And so if he had players that wanted to use more flair on the ball, he didn't try to change that. He wanted his players to attack. He wanted his players to rely on their natural instincts, and he wanted them to just play. And I think that was the first time a men's national team showed that they can be creative. They have technical quality, and that was to me the first moment that, I think that was provided a little bit of a blueprint for this team that we're seeing now. And that, if you're creative, if you come from a different place besides Canada, and if you learn to play soccer a certain way, you can bring those influences into the game, right? It's not about putting square pegs into round holes. It's about using your talent and influences to better the team. And I think Stephen Hart was one of the first people that understood that with the men's national team.
Now it's John Herdman's time. It's this team's time. We've got, less than 60 days. I think we're at 54 days maybe today. I'm not counting it down every single day, but often I'm looking in the mornings how many days until the World Cup. What are the odds on knockout round? Where do you stand? You want to give us a percentage chance? Do you want to give us your gut feeling? We'll take any and all. Will Canada get through?
I think there's a world in which they could. And I think that's probably about as far as I'm going to go. You're not going to get brazen predictions from Canadians. I'll see. Come on. I know things work differently up here, but that's one of the ways. You're not. And I think part of that perhaps is just there's still some hesitation from a lot of Canadian soccer people, just because for years the men's national team, let people down. Look, I think if anything, the schedule lines up really well for them. You get your first game against Belgium where you should have zero expectations. A loss seems likely, and that's fine. And you get that game out of the way. Croatia, if you can build confidence and run kind of an aging team into the ground, maybe you find a draw somewhere in there. And then that sets up as a must-win game. And I would rather, if you're Canada, your must-win game comes at the end, where you feel like you can build some confidence going into it, as opposed to at the beginning. So it would depend against Morocco in that final game. I think a draw is very likely, and then I go back and forth on that Morocco game. A win would put them through, wouldn't it? 4 points would probably be enough in some scenario. I'm starting to feel like 2 draws is a little bit more likely. And look, if you can get 2 draws and maybe score in every game, that should be considered a success.
Look at the expectations from the top team in CONCACAF. Come on.
I was gonna say Charlie's already asked. I saw him in the chat. He already asked Anders to cut out where he said they're getting through, just so he has that in the camera roll to dunk on everyone.
Cut it out. I'm saying they're getting through.
I can see a world.
They're gonna surprise.
Dude, I can see a world where that happens. I really, really can, because I think. But I guess if we learned anything from their game against Uruguay, it's just how quickly they can be hurt. And I think Belgium is just far, far superior. Croatia is probably at that level. So the margins are just going to be super, super thin, right?
And when you said the weakness is the center of the park, typically for Canada, that's why I think the 3-4-3 might not be the right formation for them, especially in that opening game. That maybe a 4-2-3-1, which they lined up in Azteca, might be the best way to solidify the midfield and then counter with your three best. I mean, that could be a situation where Kyle Larin it continues not to play. So then you just line up Jonathan David, Tajon Buchanan on the right, Alfonso on the left, and then whoever you feel like plays best underneath those three, and you just counter, defend as a unit, lock off the center of the pitch, and that threesome will hurt any country on their day. That's a group that can beat you 1v1, that can beat you just on pace alone, and if you allow a 3v3 situation with those three, I would bet on the Canadian three against most defensive trios.
And in a tournament situation, I will always bet on talent too. And that's why I think Canada has game-breaking talent, which gives me confidence in them possibly winning and getting out of the group. I guess the reason I'm kind of couching this, and I'm speaking for Canadian fans everywhere, so I might be wrong here, but I do think there is an element in Canadian fans watching this team in that they're just happy to be at the dance right now, right? I really do think there's a lot of that because for so long, that the men's national team was an afterthought. So showing up with the kind of consistent performance that they put in against Uruguay, like for 90 minutes, they were dictating the tempo. That would, I think, constitute a success for Canadian fans. And then maybe in 2026, the expectations change when the games are here.
Well, that's the pressure. That's the difference of pressure from the Canadian national team, given the talent they have and the results that they've been able to put up, versus the American team, where the results haven't really been what we wanted, but yet the pressure is that we are a top 10 team in the world.
Do you remember, when you at like a high school party, when you would see the guy, the guy or the girl who was invited to their first ever party, and they immediately became the life of the party because they weren't afraid what anybody thought of them because they didn't really know any of the people around them. And they produced moments that you would talk about the next day, and they became party guy or party girl because they were just so happy to be out of their parents' house. That's Canada at the World Cup.
No, but I see, Josh, I've experienced the opposite, which is they're not used to it. It's a little overwhelming. They're stuck in the corner. Somebody's got to drag them out. So there's two sides of this.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
A little stilted in
Does
conversation.
anybody here think Tajon Buchanan is going to be awkward at a party? If the party is the World Cup. I'm telling you, I think this Canadian, and here's I'll be honest, talking to players about this, a lot of players and people around the men's national team know that this is an opportunity for these players to advance their club careers. They might not get another chance to go to a World Cup. And I'm not saying you scout solely on the World Cup, but look at the players throughout Canada's starting 11 that could move in the winter window because of the World Cup, right? Kamal Miller, Alistair Johnston, Ismail Kone, Jonathan Osorio, all of these players could be in line for big moves. And I think they know that they have to come out guns a-blazing. I mean, we don't really have guns a-blazing here in Canada, thankfully. But I think there is an expectation there that they have to go for it because a lot of these players know, their futures depend on it. That's why I think they'll be the life of the party.
All right, we'll see. If you want to get ready, no better way than to read the Voyagers. Give us the book sell here. Joshua, I'll let you go.
The book begins in 1986 with Canada's first trip to the World Cup and tracks, how they basically rescued themselves from being an afterthought in Canadian consciousness to 2022. And it does so by both telling the untold stories of this men's national team, but also telling the stories of the people that did very, very important work to turn this team into something that I think a lot of Canadians can be proud of. It was very much modeled after Ralph Honigstein's Das Reboot, which told a similar story about the German national team. And my genuine hope is that if you have any interest at all in knowing how this men's national team is turning Canada into a real soccer country, you'll learn something from this book.
There you have it. Joshua Kloke. By the way, I read all of Das Reboot, Dave. So just remember, back in the day, read that whole thing back to front. All right?
Well, aren't you
thank
fancy?
You. Golf clap. Golf clap. All right. Thank you, Joshua. We appreciate your time, man. Okay. That was a joy. That was a pleasure. I see now why you're running up north every week, Dave, to opine on the Canadian side of the game. Big thanks to Joshua Kloke for joining us. And go check that book out. I've ordered it here while we've been doing the show. Actually, okay, so for extra time for Club and Country Qatar 2022, just to give you an idea of what's coming the rest of the year, we will have watch-along shows for every single World Cup match. We'll have players, former internationals on the U.S. side, players who truly understand the core of Wales and Iran and England as well, many with MLS connections. So we're going to have a great time watching those with you. Come hang out, get in the comments section, ask questions, yell, scream, cry with us, whatever happens. TBD, we'll do those for both the U.S. and Canada throughout the World Cup as long as it lasts. We'll have this Club and Country Qatar 2022 show continuing. I believe MLS Today will transition into World Cup today, but I'll let you break that news on Twitter Spaces / the MLS Today podcast
feed. Do we
feed.
have the line yet for Robert Earnshaw or Andy Dorman? Who's our Wales expert?
I don't know. We got to figure. That's true. We got to dig a little deep.
Okay.
We got to go. We got to go and find it. I feel Dorman. I think Dorman would be a good one. But Earnshaw, I mean, he might be too big time for us. We'll see.
I would say as a Northeastern grad, it sucks to be you, but Charlie's not here, so we don't have to do the whole Boston thing.
Yeah, we don't have to go too deep into that. And then extra time, we'll continue obviously covering MLS. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday. With all your big questions ahead of the stretch run. We will, of course, cover the MLS Cup playoffs all the way through MLS Cup. Then there's an expansion draft. There's a super draft. There's a lot more to come. We will bring it to you. It's going to be a busy rest of the year. Hopefully we enjoy it. Depends on the performances and the results, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday.
I would say a World Cup, I think, is much needed right now, and I think no matter what,
That's
we're
true.
Like it.
That's true. It's that post-international, like poor international break hangover right now. It's woe is me.
And it was
it's
like
infecting everything.
I think I told you this. I went to the 2018 World Cup, and it was like, man, I can't believe the U.S. isn't in. And then you get there and like, I got nothing to lose. And you just enjoy every game. Now we're back to the other side, which is I've got the U.S. and Canada, and I'm going to live and die.
Just a little soul-crushing anxiety to keep things interesting for you. By the way, Anders says that we're not doing ETR anymore with the Sounders out. It's not official, but
make that official. If the Sounders make it, I want it to be known that on September 28th, Anders said
reverse jinx. That's going to overtake the Baron T. All right, truly now. Adios, everybody. We'll see you Thursday.